And when you're done. And it should be, why don't you give that? I can have this to Jason.
All right.
Amy's the
Yes.
first question anyway.
Great.
Experience.
Welcome, everybody, to this great event tonight at UW Superior. My name is Maria Kuzo. I'm proud to serve as the Provost and Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs here at the university. And it's always great to welcome people to our campus and especially to this kind of a learning event. I'd like to acknowledge the contributions of the Thompson Center to providing funding support for this event. The Thompson Center is delighted to be able to sponsor this event and partner with UW Superior's Center for Continuing Education and our Link Center. As I call these folks' names, I'd like them to just rise so you see the many people that were behind the success of this event. So thank you to our UWS colleagues, Caitlin Bauman, Ilse Heschen, Beatrice Dornfeld, Danielle Fagan, and the person who never puts her name on the list, which is Catherine Gamont. We'd also like to thank the Thompson Center staff, Alex, Ruth, and Lily, for their collaboration in planning this event. For those who are unfamiliar with the Thompson Center, let me just say a few words about it. The Thompson Center was established to follow in the footsteps of Governor Tommy Thompson, who proudly worked with colleagues on both sides of the aisle in Wisconsin to advance the public good. The Thompson Center seeks to carry on Governor Thompson's legacy by informing and inspiring current and future public leaders, by fostering leadership skills and promoting effective public leadership. They work to further these goals by offering public events such as tonight, funding research and scholarships, honoring exemplary public leaders with the Distinguished Public Leadership Award, and conducting other activities across all UW campuses. All the events associated with the Thompson Center are free and open to the public. For more information on their upcoming events, grant opportunities, or other aspects of the center, please visit the Thompson Center website. I guarantee you'll find some great opportunities there. Superior Dialogues is UW Superior's response to a time of increasing social and political division in an effort to promote and engage in concepts related to the skill of civil dialogue. We continue to thoughtfully curate learning sessions focused on various aspects of depolarization, personal values, respectful conversations, and curiosity. Most notably today, we are thrilled to host Mónica Guzmán, author of the golden book that is sitting everywhere in the room. I never thought of it that way. How to have fearlessly curious conversations in dangerously divided times. Mónica Guzmán is a bridge builder, journalist, and entrepreneur who lives for great conversations sparked by curious questions. A Mexican immigrant, Latina, and dual US-Mexico citizen, she lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids and is the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. Our format tonight, true to Mónica's message, is conversational in nature. Mónica is joined by our own Dr. Jason Iwan and Dr. Amy Starzecki as moderators for this fireside chat. Jason serves as a professor and the department chair for UW Superior's Writing, Language, and Literature Department. Jason's book, Rose and Blood, won the 2020 Miller-Williams Poetry Prize. Additionally, he won the Ruth Ann Wiley Memorial Novella Contest for a momentary joke book and the Emergency Press International Book Contest for 6 trips in 2 directions. We are very proud of Dr. Iwan. Amy is the district administrator for the School District of Superior. She began her tenure in 2018. Since then, Amy has worked to increase student graduation rates and overall student achievement for all student populations in Superior by working together with families, students, staff, and community partnerships. Amy's 20-plus career extends across small, medium, and large school districts in a variety of educational leadership roles. And we are also proud to call her one of our community partners here at UW Superior. I'd like to say thank you publicly to both Jason and Amy for their service tonight. The fireside chat will last approximately 1 hour, with time provided at the end of their conversation for open Q&A from our audience. And now, let's learn our SOS signs, activate our curiosity, understand people, walk necessary paths, and practice our honesty to invite the intuit moments that will enhance our knowledge, grow our skills, and maybe, just maybe, change our lives. Thank you all for coming, and please enjoy.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Thanks for having me here tonight, and thank you for being here, Monica. This will be an interesting evening. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to start with an easy question. Sound good? Our first question is, tell us a little bit about your book and why did you decide to write it?
So I wrote the book because I became obsessed with the question, what is getting in the way of our seeing each other? And how can we get rid of that? I was facing two sets of dilemmas when I thought about the book's core ideas. One was as a journalist in Seattle who had created a new publication. I was getting a lot of pressure from the community to make the publication dress entirely in the flavor of one political side, one ideology. And that was clashing with a sense that I had that journalism is at its core curious and open, and that there was an obligation to hold a space for multiple perspectives. The other dilemma was in my family and the contrast between my family's experience and what I saw happening around the country vis-a-vis the political climate. I am the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. My parents and I, Mexican immigrants, voted very differently. I voted for the Democratic candidates in the last two presidential elections. They voted very enthusiastically for the Republican candidate and plan to again. And I plan to vote for the Democratic candidate this time as well. And as you can imagine, as I'm sure many of you maybe can relate to, 2015, 2016 was loud. It was tense. They had been on the opposite side of me politically since we became citizens in the year 2000. It was instant Republican for them. And I was like, oh, okay. And, instant Democrat for me. But things really got so much more heated around that 2016 campaign. And yet we were able to have conversations where even though there was heat, it's like we kept it to a simmer, right? Because I sort of think of it this way, heat in a conversation is good. Friction is good. The question is whether you're cooking something or burning something. And it's very subjective, all of that. But that's kind of the point. Like, how can we, because I feel like we must, invite and use friction among different perspectives in such a way that it doesn't burn too much of our trust, too many of our relationships, too much of our sense of dignity, right? But that it cooks new perspectives, a more expanded worldview, especially at a time that seems like it almost, if you just leave it to its default settings, this climate narrows us.
So I want to ask a follow-up if that's okay. As superintendent, I've experienced a variety of conversations, particularly over the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years. My job is very different than I think it used to be 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And what resonated with me in this book was that family piece, because that's what resonated, that's what brought me to this book was my own experience in my own family and some of the divide that some of us might feel in our own families. And I think our strategy as a family is we don't want to burn those bridges and those relationships. And so we avoid those conversations. And so can you just talk a little bit about maybe that's not a good strategy? Or maybe it is.
Right. I mean, there's no universal prescription. I want to be clear on that. Everything is as unique as all of us are and all of our relationships are. I have spoken with many families since this book came out, and I began having the honor and privilege of going out and meeting different people. And I remember, several folks telling me, we have figured this out. We don't talk about politics, and it works. And I ask some questions and I learn about it. And where it does seem to work, and this is me thinking out loud here, where it does seem to work is where politics doesn't rise for any member of the family as being particularly urgent, preoccupying, or identifying of who they are and what they care about. In those families, in those situations, that seems to work. But the opposite is where it can really actually burn relationships where you intend to protect them. I remember one woman, Courtney, somewhere in the Midwest, I forget exactly where, might have been Indiana. She was the first to, I never thought of it that way moment when she was talking to me about this. She said that what happened with her was she and her father, very, very close, and she's got some strong ideas, issues she cares deeply about. They started to really, really clash around politics to the point where her dad said, I need us to no longer talk about this. And so Courtney said initially, okay, Dad, like that makes sense. Let's give this a try. What she started to recognize over the weeks and months to follow was that by not talking about this, it's like her dad was saying, I don't want to talk about you. Because one of the ways that we receive people we care about is to learn about what they care about. And so when you X that out of your conversation, you risk making someone feel like you won't kind of walk where they're walking just to see where they are.
So what do you do in a situation like that when they don't, how do you reach out to them when they're the one who doesn't want to know, and you want to disclose, you want to talk about it, but they're not curious, right? How do we reach out to those who are not curious when we want to engage them?
Yeah. Well, I hear a version of that barrier quite often, this sense of reciprocity being a requirement. I don't feel like I can approach this person with curiosity because I'm fairly confident they won't meet me with their own curiosity. And I've heard folks say, I gave this a real shot, talked with my uncle for an hour, asked him a lot of questions. He asked none back. That can feel really frustrating if you come in with that expectation, which we often do. We really do expect reciprocity. So a couple things to that. One is the science and the research is showing us that curiosity is contagious. It's not guaranteed, but it is contagious, that it could catch on. So Julia Minson at Harvard Business School and some others have really led the research on this. But we know now that if you come into a political disagreement using what she calls hedging language, which means you're not speaking about your view as if it's the absolute truth. You're speaking about it with some flexibility, and you can script that however you want. As I think about it, here's what matters to me. Or, right now I feel like it's this, but what do you think? There's ways that you can add that movement, fluidness. And what we know is that if you bring that into a conversation, it is far more likely that whoever else is in the conversation with you will adopt that hedging language. And you will see language work in your favor. It will make the whole topic something that's a little more maneuverable. So that's one thing. And the other thing I will say to that is, I suppose to invite empathy into this situation. I've heard about the following imbalance from many different perspectives, from many different orientations. And what the imbalance I'm thinking about goes like this. Somebody comes up to somebody else, and for the first time in a long time, or maybe ever, gets curious about their point of view. And let's say that this somebody else, let's say it's your uncle, right? Your uncle, let's say that let's say they're conservative, and they're surrounded by liberals and liberal culture. And mostly they're just afraid they're going to be monsterized and shamed, right? And so all of a sudden, niece comes along, asks a bunch of questions. How long will it take before the debt he feels is met? For all the listening that hasn't happened yet, how long will that take? Will it really be met in the course of an hour, if it has not been exercised before, you know, and it's not just objective. Sometimes there are people, and I've had moments where I've done this. I look at a person and I don't see the person. I see the entire other side. And I expect them to meet my demands, and I put on them all the evils that I see on the other side. And so it's going to take a while. Like that person now has the burden of, you know, making me feel heard and understood, but I'm putting on them the entire group. And so there are so many ways that people can feel blocked to a conversation where reciprocity can happen or where curiosity can go two ways. But the main principle is across a divide where there is suspicion and some distrust, people can only hear when they're heard. So the best and only chance you have is to apply genuine listening where you are not trying to change them. And that's challenging enough just to convince someone else through your practice and behavior that you mean it. You really aren't trying to change them. That's hard when maybe some part of you really does want to change them.
You have to be prepared for a long conversation.
And what? I'm sorry.
You have to be prepared for a long conversation.
Or the flip side of that is you can have a conversation for 5 minutes now and pick it up in a week for another 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be like, okay, here we go, you know, like this one big serious, just all at once. It can often be better in small pieces, little glimpse, pass the turkey. That's it.
Just let them know you're there, you're available.
Yeah, and that you're not gonna interrupt after the first word they say. You're not gonna judge or shame after the second word they say. That's hard enough, and it's rare enough that it will be noticed.
So I'll move to our next scripted question here, which is related to the first one. But how did you, what's your story, the story of you coming to become a bridge builder? Like how far back do you remember in your childhood, or, how far back could you like identify that you were interested in this, that you were interested in being a peacemaker or in bridging cultures, communities?
That's a great question.
Bringing people together.
Yeah. The thing I think about that feels tied and that goes way back in my story is going to the movies. And I know that seems to have nothing to do with this, but as I write about in my book, I think I open a chapter with this. My parents used to take us to the movies at least once a week. At least. Sometimes we'd go twice, on a Saturday and a Sunday, or a Wednesday night and a Saturday. And I used to think that was normal. Everyone went to the movies. And it was like fourth grade recess where I realized, no, that's not it at all. Some people don't go to movies for months. I'm like, what? I thought this was a ritual, Nope. The reason I think that is important is because fiction and stories have this awesome power to help us observe lives that are not our own. Good fiction has to add up in the following way. The characters' motivations have to make sense. One of the key reasons I dislike what I think is a bad movie or TV show is when I don't get it. Why? No, I'm not seeing that. It seems random and sporadic. I don't buy it, right? But good movies, whether the characters are heroes or villains or cast that way, if it's a superhero movie or much more nuanced, you're able to see what is motivating people. And so I think that from a very young age, I really did intuitively believe that everybody has their reasons. And so when I became a journalist, it was about discovering those reasons, not thinking that they're there for some people, but not for others. They're always there. It's just a matter of whether they'll let you in, whether you can get close enough to see it. Because sometimes, look, it's not all language and words, right? Not everybody is, I'm such a raging extrovert. Not everybody wants to just sit and talk all day. But getting to know each other is a key piece of understanding each other and the society that we're all cycling in and trying to make useful.
So it was really kind of in story and narrative that
Exactly.
you came to this.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And you've got some experience with story and narrative and poetry, so I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's Yeah, it's the best. I mean, could you talk a little bit about the importance of narrative with education, I suppose, and with this work that you do?
Oh, it's everything. It's everything. So one of the strongest tips in the book that's really resonating everywhere because I think it is just so effective is to ask how, not why, when you're trying to learn someone's motivation or path to a view. So what I mean by that is, you know, you want to know what somebody thinks about immigration, and it's across a divide, especially. If you ask, why do you believe what you believe about immigration? Perfectly curious question. What are the 5 whys in journalism? I mean, the 5 W's in journalism. It's a great question. But across a divide, asking why can make people feel kind of on the stand all of a sudden, a little bit judged preemptively, right? And so you're like, why? Oh my God, why? And so you're gonna go to the reasons that others have taken shelter under. So the stuff you see on social media, the stuff you see on cable news, you know, here's why, and here's why, and here's why. And then the person who asked is going to go, well, that's dumb. Here's my reasons for the other thing. Here's why, and here's why, and here's why. And then no one's going to budge. So you're just going to insist those same reasons, but louder. And then it's just going to cycle around. But when instead of asking, why do you believe what you believe, you ask, how did you come to believe what you believe about immigration? You are asking for someone's story. And the great thing about someone's story is you can't charge them with fake news. They are the world's reigning expert on their own experience. So whatever you think of the conclusions they've come to, you cannot deny the path they walked to what they believe. And there is always truth in someone's story, even if you don't believe there's truth in their conclusions.
We'll go to our next question.
Mhm.
I like this one the best, actually. So, in your own personal experience, what have you learned? Let me rephrase. What have you learned to like the most about a person whom you initially identified as the other, as you've termed in the book, the other?
Is this a question leading me to think of a specific person?
Yeah. Well,
Okay, I could do that.
what have you learned about? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to name that person, but
Say
what
the
have you
question
learned?
one more time, just to crystallize.
What have you learned to like most about a person that you originally identified as an other?
Yeah, I am thinking of someone who joins me on episodes of my podcast. Her name is April Lawson. She's a dear friend and a colleague. She's conservative, I'm liberal. She's religious, I'm secular. We have a lot of differences. What have I learned to like about her? She is so in touch. She is more in touch with the true mysteries of life than I am. She is getting me to see things that my worldview does not open its eyes to as easily. If some of the episodes, you can see it happen live. You can see me respond to something she says. You know, you can almost see my eyes go wide. I'm a very expressive person, so you'll probably hear it too, like, whoa, what? No way. And I'm not going to believe the things she believes. But boy, I've intuited for some time that the truth is deeper than what can be counted and proved as fact. And she's, I don't know, every conversation with her when we talk about the real stuff leaves me so illuminated. And she says the same about me, and it's really cool. It's really cool.
So on that same note, kind of along the same lines, you talk a lot about, I've never thought about that before moments, right? Do you have one that resonates with you that just kind of stands out, that is one of those big moments for you?
See, these questions are tough because I have too many. And then it's like, will one of those rise to the top in this moment? Yeah. And I'm like, will one rise to the top in this moment?
Or something she said to you in a podcast that really, could you give an example maybe?
Yes.
For those of us who haven't.
The episode that came out today is the most challenging episode we've ever produced on the podcast. Every episode has a driving question. So a question that focuses the conversation. And it's ultimately a question that's a bit of a mystery, but is designed to bring out some strategies that people can use to bridge the political divide. The driving question for today's episode is, it's hard even to say it out loud. How am I supposed to engage with someone who thinks I shouldn't exist? In the course of my interview with Kai Cheng Tom, a trans activist, bridge builder who is just an extraordinary human being and writer, and she really just knocks my socks off. Oh boy, we're gonna go deep, okay? Here we go. And I encourage you to hear the whole episode. There's a point where I bring to her a question that is basically about what hate is, and what it's not. And she said, I have been loved. She says, I know that I have been loved by people who do not accept my sexuality as the way God designed sexuality to be. And so I was already like, okay. And then she said, and you know, I think that fear and disgust and revulsion are not in and of themselves hate. She says, I think about love and hate as a practice. It's if you take actions that get in the way of my living and thriving in the same way others can, that's gonna feel like hate. But if someone has that revulsion and fear, we all have revulsions and fears, and maybe that's not hate. And I was really surprised to hear that, and I definitely had an I never thought of it that way moment. Wait a minute. So okay, like we can be afraid that, I mean, somebody once said, April told me this quote, that disgust is the language of hate. We know that those things can lead to hate. We often don't think about where disgust ends and hate begins. Anyway, but there's an opening, there's space there almost to receive each other's hesitations, receive each other's tensions and frictions without thinking we're monsters. The title of the episode is Am I a Monster? Conversation with trans activist Kai Cheng Tom. So there you go. Let's
Thank
look
you.
him up.
So is it my turn now? All right. Yeah, how can we address distrust in education, higher education, all, K through PhD? When you have, and this was mostly your question actually, Amy, right? But so help me out here if I'm not interpreting this right. But for me, it's like when you have a student in class, sometimes you can tell like they're just not buying it, because of what you're trying to teach them.
Oh, okay, whatever it happens to be.
Right, because there's, you just kind of see it in their eyes, like, and it's probably distrust, right? And is that kind of what you're thinking? But you're coming at this from an administrative position.
Well, I'm also thinking about some of the narrative that talks about education and indoctrination, and how are those different, and how are those, how do we get through that mistrust?
And are they different?
Right.
Is education, is it a form of indoctrination?
Yeah.
Or acculturation?
It's tough. It's in the eye of the beholder, for sure. For sure. Indoctrination, to me, and I get geeky about language, seems to connote forced education, or education that may not care what I think. Sometimes people see that just in the word education, though, depending on the context. I hear language like on social media. Sometimes I go through threads on people's Facebooks or Instagrams where people are disagreeing about something political, and someone basically says, like, go get educated, come back to me. So that says, I don't accept your perspective until it changes. And so that has a way of, I think for valid reasons, making people feel pretty unheard and unreceived and unwelcome. So I think when people, leverage the accusation of indoctrination, I think that that is a fair interpretation, that there are concerns or perspectives that they hold that they either haven't been invited to share or just think would be useless to try. And these people don't even want to hear it, or they're going to think it's useless or worthless, or they're going to think I'm worthless. At a lunch today with students, we talked about this one concept from an author, David McRaney, who wrote a great book you should all read called How Minds Change, the latest on the science of persuasion. And he talks about all the research that adds up to this one formula. The fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. Belonging is the most important thing, right? So if we don't feel like whatever institution is supposed to be watching out for our kids, watching out for us, watching out for our civic health, if we feel that that institution can't be trusted because it's not reaching, I don't know, for whatever reason, then education's going to feel like indoctrination.
So as a follow-up, do you have advice for educators to build those bridges with our communities, our families, to make sure they build those trusting relationships?
Yeah. I think one of the downsides of institutions is they tend to rest a little bit on process when it might be time to shake things up, right? So, universities, like journalism, if you go into, a newsroom meeting, the editorial board morning meeting's been the same for years. And it's got these sorts of, assumptions about the public kind of baked in. We know our community really well. So if we just go around the table, these editors and reporters, we're golden. We know what people need to hear and need to see. But when social media came along and there was more participation from people who were reading the news, that model had to change. And newsrooms had to understand that, no, you never knew what people needed to know. You just mostly thought you did. And now there's an opportunity to go and listen more. So your obligation is to go and listen more. So I would pose that challenge to any institution. Can you shake up how you think this is supposed to go, right? The processes of school board meetings, the processes of getting input. Can there be places where you get more proactive? Can there be places where instead of having the large room, the large community meeting where people had to sign up ahead of time and then they run out of space and it's at a time of day where they can't make it anyway, and things like that, where you see a lot with city halls and town halls, can you change what your job is? And okay, every now and then I'm going to go have like a coffee meeting with someone in the community who has a strong opinion, who I've seen has a lot of influence and seems to represent a lot of other folks who share her concerns. I should get to know her. And I should have that one-to-one conversation where she's not afraid of getting judged and I'm not afraid of getting judged. And I can really understand where she's coming from. And maybe I never thought of it that way. Maybe, oh, that's what's really worrying you? We can address this in the policy we're working on. Maybe there's a way we can address it. Let's keep talking. So it's like a community framework that might need to come in, so that you could take more proactive steps to demonstrate not just a welcoming, I welcome more input. No, an actual intention to earn trust, which is different.
So being approachable and listening
And
to some,
proactive.
yeah, right.
Yeah,
And I
reach out. Don't wait for people to come to you. You get your radar on, put up your antenna on who seems to be gaining the trust of the people who don't trust me.
identifying community leaders and having coffee with them. Maybe for your referendum, you can try that.
You have coffee and conversation coming up.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you feel that people have such an aversion to engaging with others who they assume harbor different convictions than themselves? And what do you think is at stake for them?
I mean, it can be so many things. I just shared the question that we explore in today's episode. And I get this question in a lot of these kinds of events. How am I supposed to engage with someone who thinks I shouldn't exist? So what's at stake? There are so many potential barriers. Sometimes people are afraid that a relationship will not survive an honest, candid conversation about what people truly believe. So that's one way that fear gets in the way. Sometimes people are afraid that by engaging with someone who disagrees with them at all, they are already dishonoring themselves or some conviction some cause, some belief that is so much a part of who they are, that they begin to believe the myth. I believe this is a myth, that engagement is endorsement. That if I talk to somebody else who holds different ideas that I find not only maybe unsavory, but really, really, really wrong, that it will taint me. And in places like social media, we have seen that happen, right? Because these are uncontained conversations where people are rewarded for judging and mobbing and excluding. And the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. So there's a lot of fear that comes from that. Oh gosh, I mean, it just goes on. And also, you know, I'll be curious, but they won't be. I'll give an inch and they'll take a mile. Also, this is all about just meeting in the middle. I don't want to meet in the middle. I have my convictions. That's a huge misunderstanding of what this is about. You can be very far left and very far right and work on ways to both hear and be heard that will make you more persuasive and influential. All the time, 100% of the time. It's not about releasing your convictions. It's about letting them breathe by allowing yourself to receive what someone else thinks, so that, you know, then they feel heard by you. Well, guess what? That means they're more likely to hear you back, you know? But yeah, the list is endless. People have a lot of reasons not to do this.
So follow-up question. Do you believe it's harder today to do this work than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago?
Yes.
Okay.
100%. Because we've seen it. We've seen the rhetorical assassinations. We've seen the exclusions. We've seen the bridges burned. We've seen the families hurt. We've seen it, and it's very scary.
Do you feel social media is to a great extent responsible for that? Or is it just the political polarization?
Our communications technologies have come at us faster than we've been able to mindfully receive them. So it's not the fault of the technology, because the technology is nothing without our use of it, but it's how the technology seems to favor or disfavor certain aspects of our psychology. So in part 1 of the book, Sorting, Othering, Siloing, I talk about how social media is more efficient at sorting. Very easy to build communities of people who agree with you, and people who agree with you about how awful those folks are. And then just surround yourself with those stories, silo yourself in that place. It accelerates what probably would have happened anyway by degrees. But at the same point, it's all about how you use social media. You can intentionally use social media to do the opposite, to counter that default, you know, to go look generously and listen generously at communities that believe something different. Reddit is really good for that and has been for years. You can find that community and you can listen just to understand. And you might have a lot of I never thought of it that way moments, you know, if you listen that way. But social media is also so, it gets us in a way that we just don't notice. And so we end up reacting. And I was talking earlier, you know, you lose your agency when you let your emotions dictate your actions. And you can scroll through a feed for no more than 2 minutes and be triggered by 10 things. You know, like I gave the example earlier, the vulnerable example of like, you know, I'm not proud of this. There's a lot of reactions we have we're not proud of, but like, here's someone who, and this actually happened once. It was like a minute I was scrolling between something, and I got really irritable. And I know I got really irritable because I like barked at my son. Where did that come from? And I went, hang on, like, what did I look at? And I went and opened whatever it was, and I scrolled back. I was like, that's it. It was me seeing that someone who was, this was a couple years ago, someone who does something in a very similar space as me just won a big award that I wanted. But I didn't notice. I didn't notice, and I didn't catch that emotion in the act. And then I reacted, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure we can all relate one way or another. Okay. I never thought of it that way. Your book, you make what I, wait, am I right spot here?
Mhm.
Yep. You make what I consider to be a particularly bold claim that, quote, trying to change people's minds when you don't understand them never works and is never worth it. Use the word never twice. You're not never supposed to say never, apparently. But
True.
Do you,
Yep.
do you think that this is true of education as well? Which after all is a form of changing people's minds, is it not?
That's a great point. Trying to change people's minds without understanding them. That's a wonderful, wonderful question to help me kind of explore the nuances of what I mean. In the context of education, when you're in that context, when you're in the classroom and you're receiving the teachers, you're already bought in to a certain social contract, right? You're bought into the contract that I'm here to learn. You're bought into the contract that this teacher has something to teach me. And I would say that in that situation, for the most part, you don't think that teacher disrespects you just because she's teaching you. You don't think that. You wouldn't probably think that. You would think, I'm here to learn. I'm here to absorb knowledge. And so there's that. I think in regular conversation, if you just bring up a topic and then appear to lecture someone else, or they feel that they are being lectured, and that there's something that they don't like about it, but they're not able to communicate it, it's not the same social contract. It's not, most of the time in most of our conversations, we're not signing up for lectures, if that makes sense. But that may not be the educational context you referred to. Like, am I getting to it?
Well, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, the social contract is maybe true of higher education, but like K through 12
That's right.
also, they're not really they're not voluntarily there necessarily.
Right.
So there is probably a distinction between those two different types of education.
Can you shed light on that piece of it, since you work on K through 12?
Shed light on.
Well, you were saying that K through 12, it's not the same social contract as someone signing up for college and picking a major or something
Do
like
you
that.
need to understand kids to
Right.
teach them when
Well-
they don't have a choice to be there?
Yes, I mean, I think there is a foundational aspect that all educators understand, that you have to have those relationships with your kids before you can teach your kids. I think that we all know as educators is important in K-12.
Right.
And
right.
so that's what we talk about a lot in K-12, is building those strong relationships. That's why having small class sizes are important, right? To be able to build those relationships. So be able to have that context for which you're going to continue teaching, I think is important. Yeah.
I think so too. No, I think that's it. And noticing as an educator when someone's resisting, and then getting curious about why. And maybe, at the next break, just, hey, I noticed that maybe some of this stuff doesn't sit comfortably with you. Can you talk to me about that? And that becomes an opportunity to understand, so that you can figure out what's going on, or maybe even draw in something they've experienced into the next lesson.
Yeah, it's ideally there are models of education like in the Waldorf, style where you actually are with the same group of kids for years. So you know them very well. And it's quite well documented that that's a really effective approach, but most modern, especially public education, is not like that. So it would be ideal to be able to get to know all of your students, more than like the first day of class where you introduce yourselves and share a little bit. But it's, it's maybe just really difficult at times because we don't have the resources to do it.
Right.
And even
Right.
small class sizes are not something
Yeah.
I-
I love that piece of the Waldorf model, because there's and I've never said this out loud before, so let's see how it goes. I think that there's almost like a milestone you hit in understanding someone when something they do that's kind of one of their quirks, your response is, that's Monica being Monica, and you smile. And you might even be able to say that in front of Monica. I guess that's you being you, instead of that offends me, or that's so wrong, I can't abide that. But I think a lot of the people we're closest to, a lot of our closest friends, that's often the way we react, with a little bit of humor and just that little wink of like, okay, I get it. You're always really early, or you're always really late. I'm always really late. Or this is just what you do, or this is just how you see things. And it's a beautifully bonding affirmation of someone.
and you can anticipate how they're going to react to some new information. You're going to like the next lesson plan.
Yeah.
So you can kind of customize it for them.
Exactly. It can go really wrong if toxic dynamics are not addressed and seen and noticed. right? Then people get stuck and they can't get out. So it has its downsides.
Right, right. Like if you label someone and you box them in and you keep treating them a certain way when that's not really who they are.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Okay. To what extent do you think our identities inform our political attitudes versus our information sources?
Political attitudes versus our information sources.
Our identities. How do our identities impact that? Yes.
Yeah. It's all the stories we tell ourselves. We were talking about the power of narrative. On the one hand, it is the key out of this. It's the way out. On the other hand, it's how we got in this mess in the first place, is the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Because sometimes we tell ourselves very limiting stories. We really do. And I mean, identity, I think is given to mean, the things that we find so meaningful and purposeful and a part of us that we really attach to them, whatever we put in that identity bucket. But we should be careful, because once you attach to something, you can't see it. You turn around and it's on your back. You can't witness it. You can't look at it and evaluate it, right? And it becomes a lot more difficult for people to engage with you around something that you consider part of your identity. But going to information sources, and I'm not sure if this is what you mean, political views versus information sources.
Could be social media, could be news.
Yes, I think that there are a lot of sort of the same dynamics of I now feel that this is a part of me that people do attach to an information source brand. And by the way, like, I'm a journalist, I'm in media. That's what we try to do, because there's a cutthroat competition out there for your eyeballs. And one of the best ways to win is to make you believe that not only we're valuable to you, but you are us, that we help explain you. And so there's this loyalty that becomes really lucrative. So we just need to be careful with that. The more that I do this work, the more skeptical I have grown, and I'm just being really honest here, about identity as a framework. I know that sounds pretty wild, but I grow skeptical. Because again, whatever we attach to, we can't look at and examine the same way. So I'm not saying don't have identities, like absolutely have things. Yes, have identities as many as you want. Just can you preserve that ability to witness the connection between you and this thing that is part of your identity?
Could you talk a little bit more about what you said, journalists intentionally do, and it sounded like you were saying maybe identities are identified and then catered to, like, who your audience is, and then you kind of like almost intentionally reinforce that. So you have your demographic defined and guaranteed.
That's it. I mean, yeah, we've heard about big data, AI is sort of the next frontier that we're already in the middle of. We already know there's a lot of corporations and others who know a lot about us. And the more that they can rely on us hewing to the stories we're expected to meet, the more they can use that to cater, to slice us up into pieces of the pie and serve us the thing that is going to keep us coming back. And I don't mean to be too cynical. It's wonderful when you have a trusted source or a trusted community. Some of them are really fantastic, and they do help you examine more of who you are and connect with people who are like-minded. This is awesome. It's one of the beautiful parts of life. But I do think that the more data people have, the more power they have, to kind of get under our psychology. And we need to be careful about that. Just need to be aware.
Can I follow up a little bit on that?
Mhm.
So we talked about identity.
Mhm.
And for folks who haven't read this book yet, there's a story in here that resonates with me. And I was talking a little bit about it before. And it's the story of a group from Seattle going to a mountainous area.
Mhm.
And I'm going to try to just paraphrase this a little bit. And what my aha moment was as I read this section of the book. So you can correct me if I'm wrong here. But there's a group from Seattle that I would argue is maybe more blue, that is traveling to a rural community in the mountains and going to meet a group that is more red.
Yeah.
And they're intentionally coming together to have conversations to learn about each other.
Right.
And one of my takeaways from reading this book was the Seattle group, the urban group, really felt it was their job to educate the rural community on what life was like, what life was really like. And what came out of it was they really needed to learn what rural life was like. And they really needed to hear that story. I loved that part of the book. And I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that or expand
That
on
was a
that,
huge,
but that
I
to
never
me,
thought of it that way moment. For
that
me.
was for me too, as I read the book. And I
Huge.
just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and they assume that the rural citizens
They have,
didn't know anything about city life.
right. And it was
Mhm.
really
You
the
know-
other way around. You had to learn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So many folks from the city were like, we're coming in, you know, so
We're
that
gonna
they can
educate you.
understand us and
Right.
yeah, all of that. And they were, you know, the folks in Sherman County, Oregon were saying like, we know all about cities. We have to go to cities. Like our kids go to college in cities. We go to cities all the time. None of you come here. None of you have been here. Nobody comes here. Nobody cares. And there is this assumed superiority. You all think that your life is better and that you're better because you live that life. Where did that come from? And it was a very humbling experience. Where did that come from? There are aspects of our culture that send that message. The city, you know, the particular ways that cities work, that's what civilization is. And places that are like that are just not as civilized or something. I don't know, but I've sensed that. And it's complete crap. It's complete crap. There's so much judgment and assumption that goes one way or the other on this. And part of what really brought my heart out from that experience that I didn't realize until later when I interviewed one of the folks who was there and he was really speaking for this sense is those folks in Sherman County, we were there for, you know, a few hours. We made a big drive from Seattle. They were thinking like, this is our one chance. This is our one chance to be seen. What are we going to say? What are we going to do? How are we going to behave? I was like, oh my God, it was such a high stakes thing for them. And they just wanted to be seen and understood because they're so tired of being neglected. So yeah, I'll never forget that. It's deep lessons for me.
It's a great part of the book. So thank you for writing that. That was great.
So we've gotten a 5-minute
Okay.
notification here. So maybe one more.
Gotcha.
Okay, one more question, maybe?
Okay.
All right, so wait, whose turn is it now?
Good.
Let's see. Yeah, well, I guess the next one is, do you believe it's possible for someone to be persuaded or even educated through reason alone? Like just logic?
No.
Why not? Because that's the way it should be, right?
Machines, not robots. We never have been. We like to think we are, but there is no evidence that that's the way the human works. We justify using reason, but we don't come to our beliefs using solely reason. Hardly any of them. What is more likely to happen using solely reason are the things that we care the least about. Do you know what I mean? The things that we feel that there's less to argue with. And that comes from heaps of lived moments and experiences and values that have manifested and resulted in this or that outcome that we have gleaned all these lessons from. And no one but us has seen our movie. I can't show you my movie. That's the tragedy of life. Do you know Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation? Anyone a big Trekkie? Yeah. Data used to be able to like touch a book. They would show him just like flip through it. He could read the whole thing, right? Just like, wouldn't it be nice if we could download ourselves into each other? But we can't. So, you know, we need reason because we need to justify and we need to have enough shared understanding to be able to build and keep these great societies and institutions and structures that have allowed us to live such extraordinarily like informed and interesting lives, you know, when we're able to meet our needs at least. But no, I just, no, that's just a myth. We're
There's still
not
mind.
rational.
There's mind melding though, right?
Mind melding. Oh yeah, if we're Spock, we can do this. I think it's that. Yeah, there's always mind melding. But see, that's why it's in science fiction, because it's a fantasy. We want that so hard. We can't get it.
And maybe we don't want to read each other's minds. That was another question. We won't go there now.
We don't. Yeah, I think there would be some costs to that.
All right, now we get to turn it over to all of you. Do we have our first question from the audience? Thank you, 3 of you. Thank you so much. Oh, I knew we would have someone.
Thank you, Monica, so much for being here. There was a comment you made, and you said there's this myth that engagement is endorsement. And I'm just curious, coming from a liberal background, the kind of pushback you've received or the experience you've had with that from people who maybe are on your side of the political spectrum.
No, there's plenty. And I'm not the only one who's received it. I mean, this is a live debate, right? And what cancel culture was, you know, all the rage in terms of what people were debating about, and if things had gone too far, this was a very active conversation. I think that there's many good arguments for why engagement could be endorsement. One of them just has to do with the reality of social media. It is so visible. It is so spreadable. Another has to do with the reality of misinformation and disinformation. It is so spreadable. It seems to be so harmful. Another has to do with, I think, the fear people have, and this one's a little more dicey, but the fear I think people have that they themselves might be tainted by it. What if I begin to empathize with this person? If I begin to understand this person, will I begin to understand a horrible thing? Will I become a monster? I think, again, we're so afraid of being the monster. We're so afraid of being bad. We can't abide that, of course. So there's a lot of fear of causing harm. And in fact, on the left, I mean, there's this thing called moral foundations theory from Jonathan Haidt, wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. Fantastic book, incredible. And he talks about the moral sort of taste buds that tend to line up with folks on the left and on the right. And on the left, the care harm framework is extraordinarily important to folks who are liberal minded. Just the idea that I might cause harm will keep me from doing a lot of things that I might otherwise do. It is terrifying. It is also scary on the right, but they have a lot of other kinds of frameworks that kind of round it out a little bit. So yeah, I understand that. But one of my solutions, I suppose, is containment. Like, get off social media. Have a one-on-one conversation on the phone or just in person. No one else can hear. Where's the harm? The only harm is the harm that you think will come to you. But what do you think is going to happen? You think you're suddenly going to change your mind on something that you feel strongly about in the course of one conversation? That's not reality. That doesn't happen. And if it does, it's because your mind was fertile ground for that. It means that you want to change your mind. Nobody can change your mind. You're the only one who can change your mind. So it's sort of like, what are you really afraid of? And I don't know. I think a lot of times when we sort of face our fears, it turns out the threats are not what we thought.
I think that the democracy that we have in this country allows what you're talking about, allows us to have our opinion or thought or whatever
Yes.
on whatever side.
Yes.
And we need to learn to listen
Yes.
to everybody's thoughts instead of just immediately going to one side or the other.
Yes. And on that, I met maybe a year ago, a woman who was a teacher and told me after a talk, asked me the question I'd never heard before. And as she was asking it, she started to cry. And she said, you know, before the tears, she said, how do I know what I think? And I kind of looked at her like, it's an interesting question. Like, how do I know what I think politically? And then she told me the story. She's from Venezuela. And growing up, her parents taught her that she had to think out loud in this way, or they could die. They could be killed. People could come. You know, things could happen. The way to keep the family safe is to think in this way. So that's how she thought of thinking politically about what matters. She didn't have any freedom to do it because her family's well-being was at stake. And I really resonate a lot with my fellow immigrants who are from countries that do not enjoy the remarkable freedom that we have here. I'm sorry, but I get angry about it. Man, sometimes I really wish that a lot of like native born Americans could just spend a little time somewhere else. And then come back and realize that the fact that we have the right to disagree is a gift, that we even have that right. And that freedom is extraordinary, you know? So when I see that people just want everybody else to think like them, I'm like, ah! I can show you some places where that happens and you're not gonna like them. You know? You're not gonna want to be there. So yeah. I'm for this democracy. It does. And patriotism is supposed to be a thing that those of us on the left don't respect as much as on the right. And it's the biggest lesson I've learned from the right, is there is nothing wrong with loving this country and being proud of it. Nothing. Nothing.
Okay, I've got the next one. Thanks for the nice conversation. Monica, if your lovely interlocutors tonight were replaced by Donald Trump on your left and Kamala Harris on your right, but none of the rest of us are here. It's just the three of you, and you got an hour. What would you do, and how do you think that would go?
Love your questions. Oh my God. Okay. So you guys just have to know, I met Sam at the University of South Florida. He moderated a talk that I did at that school. Now he's here. It's so cool. With his dad, by the way. Amazing questions then, an amazing question now. What would we talk about? What would I talk about with him? First of all, I'm skeptical that I could get the two of them here. Oh, they're here? Oh, I mean, step one would be to get them to not run away because of the other. That would be step one. Convince them that there are actually no cameras. Convince them that I am not doing a gotcha. I've got no mics, and somehow convince them that, again, I'm not here for anything that would go beyond this room. That would be critical, critical. If they manage to stay, honestly, I don't know. I think that I would want to do a one-to-one. I'd be like, hey, Kamala, like, enjoy some tea for a minute while I talk to Don here. I feel, right, sorry. But I feel like I would want to do a one-on-one before bringing them together. But let's just say, yes, that we were able to do this. What would we talk about? You know what? I think I would try to get them to just forget the campaign, forget the past that's gone between them, forget what they believe they represent, which is pretty hard for a presidential candidate because they have shaped themselves. Their identity must be the robes we put them in. And I understand that. But if I could strip those robes away, right? If we could say, like, you two are two people who are vying for a lot of power, like, can we just get you down to your humanness? Can we just get you there? Okay, now, can we talk about what it might take to strengthen this country no matter which one of you wins? Like, what would that take? What would it look like? I'm not, don't try to impress me or anything. Just, I know, and I know that both of you have put yourselves through a lot to get to this place, and you know what the job is. Like, why do you do what you do? What is that thing that really drives you? And can we just, like, focus on that for a minute? And I would just have that conversation as long as I could. That's it. With McDonald's? Start with McDonald's? Oh yeah, good point. Oh, that's true. I would have, like, their favorite, their favorite meal, their favorite snacks, whatever makes them feel welcome. Have that ready. Great question.
Wow, I do not want, this question after that one is something I don't even want to ask. So that was a great question. My question is this, I'm thinking back to part of our discussion on education and like changing students' minds who come in with a very different mindset. And I'm not saying that's what was said. How do we, after teaching for as many years as I have, how do we change the perception, not only in society, but even within teachers, that the role of teaching is to disseminate information? When, in my mind, the role of education is to get students, using facts, to get students to question their views and open their minds to other ideas. How do we change that big perception of education being Teachers are here to give facts.
What a great question. And that's a good question for you too, I think. But you know what I would offer is if teaching were disseminating information, it would have some pretty big limits, because I know that what I learned when I was in 4th grade is not what they're teaching my kid now in 4th grade. And I like what they're teaching my kid now in 4th grade. We keep changing. We keep learning. Pluto's not a planet. Okay, there's that. But there's things that are a lot deeper than that, including, you know, social emotional learning. I'm so impressed with the programs for young kids around those sets of skills. The PE class that my 12-year-old is in knocks my socks off. Like, so cool and welcoming, and oh my gosh. So we keep growing in our ability to identify what information is worth disseminating. And the way we grow that information is by trying to understand ourselves better. And that's where things seem to be progressing. You know, we get more and more like in tune with the knowledge that is going to empower us as people, as citizens, as neighbors, as friends, as relatives. And that has to remain open. On the other hand, you know, to forget which of you made this point earlier, I mean, sometimes knowledge, passing on knowledge is passing on knowledge, right? Like math, for example. Hard to disagree with math. Do you know what I mean? And not, I mean, things in math change, but not at the level of 6th grade algebra. Do you know what I mean? Or 8th grade algebra. So sometimes it really is just, we pass on knowledge because, boy, for centuries now, we've determined that this stuff is useful. But when it comes to what it means to live a good life, what it means to be a good citizen, what it means to treat each other well, what it means to learn, we're still learning. So I don't know. I would try to make that actual, not lecture that, but demonstrate that. Teachers who are intellectually humble in their classroom, teachers who don't mind being wrong, are everything. Everything. Modeling that is everything. Did you want to add anything?
No, I just think our goal is always to create critical thinkers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hi, Monica.
Where are we? Oh, hi. Oh, hey, Dave.
What happens for you internally, either in your heart, or your soul, your mind, that transforms judgment into curiosity?
What happens? What happens? Yeah, what a great question. So there is an opening, but the only way that that opening can happen is if I'm really looking inward and trying to detect internally. So somebody asked me at the lunch with students today what I would add if I could write the book again. And one of the things I would add is I'm so much more aware now of how important it is to aim your curiosity inward before and at the same time as you aim it outward. To give a perfect example, like, or rather an example that keeps coming to mind, I guess, is that when we have a conversation with someone else, we think there's one conversation, right? The conversation we're having, but there's three. There's the conversation I'm having with you. There's the conversation you're having with yourself as we're talking. There's conversation I'm having silently with myself as we're talking. Once we're done talking, my conversation with myself continues. Your conversation with yourself continues. It never ends. It never ends. This is how we learn and grow and change and become who we are. And that's the way it goes. So what I have practiced is to notice the thoughts that come that influence how I am seeing the other person. And so judgments are the key kind of flag, right? Because once you judge something about another person, you've closed a door. You know, the most severe and harmful, I think, to our curiosity judgment we can make about a person across the divide is they must be crazy, stupid, or evil. And secretly and silently, I have made that judgment countless times in conversations I've had with people. And it's dismissive and it's disrespectful, but I just come to the conclusion that I have nothing more to learn from you. Now, sometimes I just need to walk away and that's it. But I don't think I am ever correct, actually, in thinking I have nothing more to learn from another human being, another deep mystery that walks this earth. That's just not true. Maybe I believe it in the moment for my own purposes. So it's an internal radar. And then when I notice that judgment, then I have a choice to turn it into a question. And it's literally that easy. It's, you know, I don't know. Even if it's like, oh, they must think the same thing, all, you know, to put it in the head of somebody else, they must think the same thing that all liberals think. You know, but it's like, do they think the same thing that all liberals think? And you can literally like sense your mind go, you know, and then it's like, okay, ask your questions. So that's what happens. It's an internal, I'm learning to notice my judgments by the physical sensations. I know that sounds weird, but physical sensations that they create in me. Like a judgment feels like a thud in my heart. And if I learn to tune into that, I can feel it happening. And so then I like take that thud and I lift it up and I go, wait a second, I don't know that. That's pretty cool.
Hi. So your comments tonight have been inspiring me to think about this, especially the title of your book. First of all, I want to say I've been an educator for many years, and I compare like the operation of school board, for example. And in recent times anyway, school boards get training, right, of how to operate effectively. So comparing that to our government and our political system, it occurs to me that what we might need to do is get our politicians trained in how to speak with one another, how to look at views differently, how to get to yes, getting to yes example, and just have some training so we are not so stuck on
Absolutely.
the views that are opposing views. And so, thank you. I think you
Yes.
should tackle that next.
Where are my Braver Angels? Raise your hand if you're a Braver Angels member. Oh my gosh, hello. So if y'all get a chance, say hello to these amazing people. Braver Angels, national nonprofit, grassroots level, 100 alliances, local chapters all across the country, co-led by folks who are red and blue. And one of the things that we've been doing nationally, it's been incredible, is exactly what you're saying. The Problem Solvers Caucus in Congress, I think it's 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, have done trainings with Braver Angels. The entire New Hampshire state legislature has done trainings with Braver Angels. Lots of folks in Minnesota. Minnesota is one of our founding alliances and has our co-founder, Bill Doherty. By the way, Braver Angel is based on marriage therapy. The tactics that keep couples, you know, that go into couples therapy are how the analogy is to Democrats and Republicans in the United States, except that in our politics, we like to think that divorce is not an option. So what do? We have to figure it out. But anyway, yeah, we're doing these trainings. They're really cool. It's an initiative called Braver Politics. We've got Braver Angels debates that have been in a lot of local races everywhere. And we have politicians coming to us saying, help. And I really wish it's Braver Angels is a citizens movement. Like, I think as citizens, whether at Braver Angels or not, we need to help our politicians, not just judge them. We need to help them. So any elected officials in the room, like, thank you. Thank you.
Monica, thank you so much for being here. Yep, I'm way at the back.
Hi.
I just have a quick question and just a statement beforehand. When you first started your speech, you were talking about how and why.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. And I want to include Dr. Iwan in this speech because he's a literary genius. Yeah. And he didn't even smile when I said that. So I want to bring up Margaret Atwood, one of our famous artists and writers, and her big seminal short story, Happy Endings. She says that life is a plot and a plot and a plot. It's all just a what. And then she says, now figure out how and why. And that's what you were discussing. And when she was pressed about this later, she said, how was the metaphysical and why was the philosophical? What do you think about that aspect?
That's interesting. The metaphysical and the philosophical. I mean, yeah, I'd want to sit with that. I think that's really fascinating. I think that another cool aspect of why questions is that why questions are better directed internally. And what I mean by that is, if I were to ask any of you, Johnny, right? If I were to ask Johnny, like, and I'm not going to, and please don't answer this right now, but why do you believe what you believe about abortion? Who knows when the last time was that Johnny was asked that question? For all I know, like, she hasn't thought about it for a while. If I were to ask any of you, like, why do you believe what you believe about AI? Why do you believe what you believe about guns? It's like, you may not know until you reflect. So the question why is better directed internally first. And even when you direct it internally, it's not like you've answered that question for all time. Like, how long would you have to think about it to really get to the bottom of your own reasons, your own philosophy? It's bottomless, you know? So when we ask other people why, that it can feel so heavy. But the metaphysical, how being the metaphysical, I don't know. I think of it as you're asking people to take you on a tour instead of putting them on trial. Yeah, putting them on trial. Anyway, I'd have to sit and think more about the difference between metaphysical and physical, because to be honest, I feel like I need to go look up the dictionary definitions again. I'd be like, yeah, what is that difference? Okay, now I can map a better answer to you.
Okay, we have a question over here, Monica.
Oh yeah, you wanted to hear too.
I would add that maybe people don't actually know what they think on every single.
Right.
Right. So you might ask them, what do you think about abortion? They might be like, it produces a defensive reaction because you might not really know.
Yeah. Right.
But if you ask someone to tell a story, it's just a much softer, gentler, you can bumble your way through stories. You don't have to do a great job about it, but it's entertaining, and, it's a parable. Like, people can kind of draw their own conclusions from it. It's just a much more gentler way of addressing a topic. And because there are characters, there's setting, there's imagery, it lingers in your imagination much longer. And then that conversation you have with yourself that never ends is that story becomes the conversation topic with yourself. Like, what did that mean? Why did that story he told was really kind of strange? What did that have to do with, and it lingers. It's mystery, and you want to solve it.
That's exactly right. I think most of the time, at least part of the answer to why do you think what you think about X is, I don't know. But in our culture, we have made it unsafe somehow to just say, I don't know. We just don't think that people will accept that. And so we don't allow the room for the mystery that's there. Story contains mystery, because it doesn't have to come to logical, airtight conclusions.
I don't know is often interpreted as I don't care.
Yeah. Sometimes I have seen a lot of political disagreements that are not disagreements about the content that you're talking about, but the degree. I care about this more than you do, and all I'm trying to change about you is to have you care about it as much as I do. That's a tall ask. You walked a different path, and that path gave you more of a sense of urgency. It's going to be really difficult for you to expect someone else to meet you at that same sense of urgency. And we translate it as they don't care, they're bad people, forget them.
Hi, Monica, back here in the corner. Hi. I was really intrigued when you were talking earlier about shaking organizations up to do things differently. And I'm wondering if you feel like organizations can cultivate curiosity, and where in the organization might that come from?
Yeah.
Internally, externally, top, bottom, all over?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think in an organization, organizations are about process. They're built up by structure and process. So the way to get a more curious organization is to encode curiosity in their structure and their process. Create new rituals, create new ways of checking into a meeting, checking out. I believe in leadership as a practice, not as something that is tied to a role of authority. So the innovation on curious organizations can come from anywhere in the organization, but there is no denying that it is faster if it comes from the top. And that's just true most of the time, unless you have a very non-hierarchical organization, that's going to be true. So, which is why I'm encouraged to see a lot of leadership trainings and conversations include things about engaging difference, because we can sense how critical that is, those sets of skills. And anyway, so it's about that. It's about what sorts of rituals can you hardwire in. And I mean, you could have fun with it. I think, like I said before, the teacher that is able to demonstrate a comfort with being wrong goes a long way. The leader, the CEO, the head of school, the principal, who can share a story. Like when she realizes she's learned something from a surprising place, can she make a space to tell that story to the school community and celebrate it and set that tone that we can celebrate learning? That's one way to do it. I really believe in things like taking certain things in stages. A lot of times when people have meetings to tackle a tough issue, they'll just jump right in. And what happens when you jump right in? A lot of the people who are first movers, I used to be a first mover. That's somebody who's just like Hermione Granger in Harry Potter. The first movers will dominate. The first movers will say the thing, and then that will become the okay thing to believe. And whoever didn't believe that, it now has a bigger hill to climb to say what they actually believe. There are structures that disrupt that. Things like everybody write it down, even in like a shared Google document, and then we'll go over and present. And now that person has to say what they initially wanted to say. But again, they've seen modeled that it's okay to have different perspectives. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do this. I don't think it's particularly technically difficult. I think the hardest thing is that, no, but there's only one way we do this. There's not. You can innovate anywhere you think that you can make it a little more flexible and make more space for people.
We have time for 2 more questions. I know there was one there. Beatrice is going to come to you. And then if anyone else, I can come to you.
Thank you. This is more of a comment, actually. You were just talking about not caring. And I guess that kind of ties back to the podcast that you had with a transgender individual, and also to families who just don't go to the topic of politics and think that's maybe the best route. I've often heard it said, and many of you probably have too, that the opposite of love is not hatred, but apathy. Right. And can you comment at all any more on that? Or do you think we've already covered that?
What a beautiful thing. I have not thought it through enough to give a really confident response. I think it's a beautiful question. And so I endorse the question for everybody in this room, that the opposite of love is apathy. I guess what comes up is I think that there's a danger in thinking that where you don't see love, there is apathy, and that is worse than hate. Because why am I saying that? So what's making me say that is I currently see one of the real problems, real challenges with the way our political culture seems to communicate to itself is the idea that we're all supposed to care about everything all the time. That is exhausting. And it's unrealistic. We're not biologically built for that. And I don't think it would actually add up to a good world. What I see is a lot of people going out of their way to meet that expectation from others. And what they end up doing is sort of checking boxes. None of us have time to understand Israel, Gaza, and abortion, and immigration, and gender issues, all at the extraordinary level of complexity that exists. I have mad respect for activists and advocates who go deep on one issue. And I think they're extraordinary people. And then they believe it so much that they go and work on that issue. That feels organic. That feels natural to me. What does not feel natural, again, is where something happens and we look around and we're like, that friend didn't post about it on Facebook. I'm going to unfollow them. They don't care. Like, what? Hang on. So I think there's just a danger, maybe because that is meeting our communications technologies and our quickness to judge, that I think is dangerous. So I think people only have so much room in their lives, and maybe that's okay. And we're all limited by the same 24 hours a day, and we're all trying to live good lives and have relationships that are meaningful. Some people do that best with smaller circles, and some people do that best with bigger circles, and we're not all going to have the same shape. of love and where we apply it, you know? And I just don't think that's ever going to change. And it might be better to accept that than to keep fighting it. It's a great question.
With that, we are going to close up the evening. So I just want to first thank our interpreters for being here this evening, Amy and Jason. Mhm.
Thank you.
And Monica, thank you so much for coming back to the Twin Ports and having a conversation with us. And thanks to all of you for being here this evening. I hope you have a great night and a super good week and an even better weekend. So thank
right.
you. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone. All right, we did it. Thank you. Thank you for everything. How's this? I've been there.
I had pop drops in here and then I ran out and I got gone.
Yep. No, I've been on stages where I'm just popping pop drops. I know how that goes.
That was pretty good.
Thank you.